Okay, so number one about the swimmer and the Junior Olympics. We'll start here. So number one, the best answer really is A, and if you put something else, you probably need to go back and read the first paragraph because it's about him reflecting on this time where he was trying to qualify for the Junior Olympics or the Junior Nationals. And it has to do with this one swim was the thing that made everything, narrowed it down. So this one, it's not chronicling, it's not talking about C either because it's not contrasting anything. And so between A and B, you really want to find the best answer, and A is a good example of the best answer. All right, for number two, it's asking chronologically what happened. So hopefully you've keyed in on that word. And so you have to go back and look at the text again and find out really what happened in this passage. Is he recalling things first, or did he first jump in, have the swim, and then reflect on it? And so that's why the answer G is best, because he's reflecting on that particular event. Number three, we have this description of the natorium, which is kind of a interesting word that you may not have heard of. But for three, we have he's describing this natorium as being nearly empty of spectators in order to do what? So what's his purpose? A lot of times we're looking at purpose here. So that's why it's A, because what's the example of the best purpose? It's not really like identifying why he had a rush of energy. It's not really explaining what's his purpose, and it's that it's empty and that it's not really peak race conditions, the best example of a race condition. So that's why A is the best choice between A and B. It's A. Moving on to number four. So we have the narrator indicates that when he swam 1,000 yards freestyle in the time trials, the world for a second seemed to. This is directly on lines 40 through 43, so you would have to look back and see what he was saying, but it allowed him to reflect in real time, is what he was saying. So again, about his reflection, it kind of ties back into like remembering and reflecting. That's why J is the best answer. 5, again, most of these answers are right in the text, and 5 is no exception. So if you went back and looked, you could find the best answer in the text, and it says that what did the narrator understand for the first time? And it talks about how it's just important to him, maybe nobody else, what he realizes that it's most important to him. So some of these other things might apply, like B, for example, you may have put, but it's again about what's his biggest realization. So that's why it's not B. Number 6, based on the passage, the end most likely refers to, and you would have to look at line 80, but what's he striving for ties into the main idea here. So we would have to say G is the right answer because it's not really fitness, it's not really like defeating anybody else. It's his last chance and he gave it all he's got. For 7, it just has to do with the description of the time trial. And so he said it wasn't even really like a swim meet at the beginning of the passage. So that's why D is the best answer. You may have gotten distracted by C, that's the distractor for this question, but it's not going to be the best answer because it's just informal, it was last minute, all those things were described in the passage. 8, this is where you have to make an inference. So what can it most likely be attributed to? He's speculating about what the cheering boy is doing. This is one of the most difficult questions on here, so you have to go back in those passages and then do process of elimination. So he's not really doing this, he's not cheering, he's not he's not attributing it to a cheering boy, it's mostly his motions. 9, this is about context clues. So you would go in and read how the narrator felt about indoor versus outdoor pool, and he definitely found it less appealing. And that comes on, let's see what paragraph that's in. Trying to find the exact paragraph when he was talking about outdoor pools on line 46. So line 46. 10. So we have the narrator hearing the words jump, and what's he most likely remembering? Again, you have to infer. It's his teammate's command the day the narrator caught the flag line. So he's recalling that. So if you go back in the passage and look at line 67, like it's asking you to, you will find that reference to the flag there. Okay, for number 11, about the Apple articles, we're going to go ahead and start with looking back into the text to see, what the emphasis or what emphasizes the following points. And so it's talking about these as well. And I think you might not even, if you look here and then you refer back to the passage on lines 6 and 7 over here, really quickly, you could probably figure out which serves to emphasize the following points, that it's stretching in every direction. So which one has to do with stretching in every direction? It's D is the best choice. Because they're everywhere, and it's incredible, and they're stunning. So this is talking about the amazing wild apple orchards. So keep that in mind as far as the main idea goes. Number 12. So this is asking about passage A. And passage A, if you look at the title, is about the history of the apple. So it's kind of good to read the introductions here so you can know the focus of each passage, especially in this compare and contrast type of section. So this one's about a history, so passage A, and we're talking about wild apples and why would the author include this part about apples in Tian Shan looking like apples at the grocery store. And so again, what's the purpose? It's a history. And if you go through the text, you can find that section where it's describing the appearance of the apples. And the purpose of this is to say where domesticated apples came from. So lines 15 and 16 discuss that. Everything else in here talks about apples, but not where they originated, or like, again, tying back to the purpose of the history of the apple. Number 13 says, passage A makes which of the following claims about plant species that are found in Kazakhstan? Kazakhstan, pronounced that correctly. So what's the claim in passage A is what we need to look at. And also keep in mind, plant species. So some of these are wrong. So we have approximately 157 species of cultivated temperate fruits originated in Kazakhstan. That's not a claim that's being made in this passage. 90% of all domesticated crops are either direct precursors or close wild relatives of plants found in Kazakhstan. No, not a claim. C, of the plant species found in Kazakhstan, 90% are species of apples? Maybe. Or D, aside from apples, at least 157 plant species found in Kazakhstan are either direct precursors or close wild relatives of domesticated crops. So at this point, I think it's between C and D, and I would look back in the text to find the right answer if I have time, and I would find the right answer on lines 30 through 31 in the text. 14. So this is switching gears. We're moving on to the next passage now. So passage B, what's the purpose of passage B? If you go back and look at the title, it comes from an article, The Fatherland of Apples. So this is also about apples, but it's more about where apples came from in the landscape. Um, so we have talking about what the passage suggests about Vavilov and why he became an agricultural scientist. What was his reasoning for even getting involved in this? So you might want to skim and see where you can find his name and when he's referred to. And right on line 67 through 71, it talks about him witnessing a famine and what made him motivated to start studying agriculture. So that would be J. 15 talks about the passage whittle away, or the line in passage B, line 80, and what is it referring to? What is it really saying? So we have gradually lost from nursery catalogs, farmers markets, and the American table. Probably, could be. You know that's the answer. But why is that the answer? Modified by plant breeders, entomologists, and pathologists? No, we don't have anything that says that that's what happened. Weeded out by scientists? We don't have that either. There's no scientist referred to in that passage or that area of the passage. D is the distractor. So I'm guessing if you got that wrong, you put D. But D is incorrect because it talks about featuring them in catalogs, and that's really not the motivation there. It's not about featuring anything in catalogs. It's just about growing which crops are hardiest and people like. Okay, so 16. Having you refer to lines 82 through 83 and the phrase named and nurtured, and what does that mean in context? So it's in the same area of this question, so you're kind of familiar with that. So you could take a guess if how these apples, what does named and nurtured mean? Is it nominated and encouraged? Well, I don't know. Nominated seems kind of a silly word to use, so I'm going to say question mark. Cited and fed? Nope. Pointed to and groomed? I don't know. Pointed to I don't really like. Identified and cultivated seems to fit most closely with this here, and that's why that's the correct answer. So nominated is not used correctly there. So if you notice words being used incorrectly, you can get rid of those right away. Okay, 17. Passage B is an inference question. So it says, it can most reasonably be inferred from the third paragraph, giving you the lines again, that the centers of crop diversity became crucially important when. So why do we need diversity? So think about that. If you can remember that from your reading, you might know that the reason why it's important is when there are problems, when there's disease, we need to go back to crops to find our old varieties or different varieties. So I think you could get rid of D because there's no disputes. It could be maybe C or A, but if you're if you remember why it's important in the text and in this section, you can figure out why it's B. 18. So this is where you had to have read and understood both of these passages, but you might be able to wing it if you could kind of just remember the tones of the passages. So if we have F, passage A is defensive, where passage B is dispassionate, I would say no passage is defensive in this reading. I could get rid of that. G, passage A is solemn, where passage B is optimistic, maybe. Passage A is celebratory, where passage B is cautionary, could be. Passage A is accusatory, where passage B is sentimental. No, neither passage had either of those. So it's between G and H, and that's where it comes down to which one would be the best answer. I would say if you're just thinking about passage A, it's not solemn. There's no sadness or depressed or gloomy feeling to that. So you could just do that off the top of your head if you were in a hurry to finish up this test and not look at the text at all. Kind of like what you did with 16, if you were doing that quickly, or like what I showed you. 19. This is a comparison again, another question that compares the two articles. So when it says compared to the author of passage A, the author of passage B provides more information about the, just look at this part, passage B provides more information about what? You know what it's being compared to, so don't get bogged down with wordy questions. And that's where it's key to underline what the question is asking you to really look at. So what is passage B talking about? Right off the top of your head, if you're just looking at that, passage B is about the reduction in the number of apple varieties. The rest of these techniques, it doesn't talk about techniques. It doesn't talk about the number of apple varieties that are thriving. It doesn't really talk about methods either, because this is talking about passage. Actually, well, it's talking about methods, but Vavilov didn't use methods, so I guess we can get rid of that. So that's why A is the best choice. Number 20 is about passage A. So this one was about passage B. This one's about passage A. It's asking you really to look at these lines and see what this quote is doing. What's the purpose? So when he's passage A quotes Vavilov as saying, "I could see with my own eyes that I had stumbled upon the center of the origin for the apple." So you have to look closely in the text to see what's happening there. So if you wanted to do process by elimination, you would know there's nothing, no one's refuting anything in that passage. I don't think USDA scientists are involved in either of these, so we could get rid of that. So between F and H, and you could maybe guess and get it right, but if you had time to look back in the text, you would see who paraphrased it. Okay, so for 21, we have a new passage here, and it has to do with a musician. And this is a good example of doing a process of elimination. So number 21 talks about his personality and how it affected his career. And for A, we have ambitious and competitive. There's no examples of him being competitive or ambitious in this. We have genial personality endeared him to other musicians, but his career suffered when he spent more time socializing than practicing. We don't have any evidence of this socializing part versus practicing. His modest and easygoing personality kept him out of the spotlight, and consequently he received less attention as a performer. For C, that's a possibility. So let's check D. His shy, introspective personality was misunderstood as a snobbish arrogance. Right there, we know that there's nothing to say that he was a snob here. So the best answer is C, and that's a lot of the times we're just going to go for the best answer in these questions. Okay, so number 22, it's asking about Barry's solo in Oh Lady Be Good, and it's asking the purpose. So there are several questions about purpose in this section, and if you look at the first paragraph, it really, G is the best answer here because it's showing, about his excellence, period. 23 goes on to explain why. So if we're looking at, it talks about the author points out that many serious jazz enthusiasts know little about him, only to explain why that readers would not be familiar with Barry. So none of the others, really fit. There's no secrecy. The author's not trying to show how knowledgeable he or she is. There's no criticism going on. So that's why, D is the best answer. For 24, we really have the answers in lines 30 through 45, and you kind of have to look at several of those lines to see really what the best answer is. But right away, when we're looking at according to the author, Barry's solos as a recording musician were often very short. We're looking for a reason why. And there's nothing that states that he wasn't a good saxophone player. And it doesn't really talk about ensembles either. So the choices we'd have would be between H and J. and we're looking for the best answer. We don't really have anything that has to do with his preference in there cited or noted. He wasn't interviewed or anything, and that's why H is the better answer. Number 25. The question says, the author indicates that during Barry's time as a musician, swing music was primarily regarded as. So you want to look at two things, during Barry's time and what was swing music for. And it was for dance parties, not for study. 26. This is asking you about a word meaning, so knowledge of vocabulary and context clues would come into play. And it's talking about courting as, trying to get someone to notice him. And that's why seek to attract is the best choice. None of these, and to pass judgment upon doesn't fit there. That would be the only one that would maybe relate, but the others aren't relevant there. 27. This is another one talking about author's purpose and also about context, word meaning, and nuance. So we have comparing sidemen to traveling salesmen in order to do what? Why is the author doing that? And so we're not going to really talk about the travel much here. Nothing to do with side jobs, that doesn't work either. I guess the D could be a possibility, but that's not illustrated. What is illustrated in the passage is the supportive role in a band, which Barry does because he doesn't have too many solos and he's unheard of. It goes along with the whole main idea of the passage. For 28, we have this one particular piece, Blues in C Sharp, that the author's describing. And it's just asking you, how did the author describe it? And so if you just look on line 71, it's right there. So a lot of these are right in the text. 29, this is asking what's unique. So that's key. What is unique about the 1940 rendition of this particular song? So it's another song, not this one. Okay, so keep that in mind because that's a little bit of a distractor. That's another song title. And this is the only one that features Barry from the beginning to the end. So you had to kind of look for that. The distractor here would probably be D. So you may have put D, but again, this is another example of best answer, and you would have to look into the text to find that and make sure you're not referring to this one on number 28. It's kind of a trick question. 30 has to do with what the author is meaning when he says a cathedral of a solo on line 85, so you know you're going to want to go there. And why is he doing it? Most likely to create a sense that, and which one of these might most likely resemble a cathedral. So that's where F comes into play because it's an awe-inspiring masterpiece. Maybe you could have figured that out without having gone back to line 85 if you just said, what's a cathedral typically here? Number 31 is asking which of the following statements best expresses the main idea of the passage. And this passage is pretty technical and pretty tricky. You definitely would have had to read at least the first and the last paragraph carefully to get, unless you're a super scientific thinker, to understand this and see really what the main idea is. So there a couple of main ideas. It's not going to be about when someone began something for this entire passage. So you can get rid of A. So we have B, C, and D left. So the gravitational tidal forces of the Milky Way are destroying the Sagittarius dwarf. Is that the main idea? Or most astronomers have come to an agreement that evidence about galaxies have formed is at best circumstantial. Or D, evidence suggests that the warp in the Milky Way's disk results from the Milky Way's interaction with a small satellite galaxy. So if you read it carefully, you would know, you might have gotten distracted by B because it does talk about the Sagittarius dwarf. But if you read it carefully, you would know that the answer is D, and the satellite galaxy is called the Sagittarius dwarf. Number 32. The question states, it can reasonably be inferred that the problem the author mentions in line 32 refers to what? So we have to go back over here to line 32 and see what the question is. And up here there's a question as well that helps guide our reading. You know, like this is background up here, so this is all background information, and then we get down here to the question. So line 32 says, it's a matter of figuring out which scenario applies. So that's the question, which scenario applies? And the question is, what caused the warp? And you could refer to this question up here to get that answer. Number 33. So this refers directly to lines 35 and 36. So of course you're going to want to go there, but it's another question about inferences. So you have to decide what the author meant, or what, in this case, the satellite galaxy is. And if you read it, then this is just basic reading comprehension, most of this passage. It's like, can you persevere through this technical, maybe boring to you reading? So if you read it and you look at 35 and 36, you'll know it's the Sagittarius dwarf. We're going to talk about on number 34, the passage which describes the study as it relates to the field of astronomy. Okay, and so what was his study even about? You have to know that. So did it lead astronomers to the discovery of the warp? No. Did it convince more astronomers to focus their attention on the center of the Milky Way? No. Did it reveal the problems with the basic assumptions held by most astronomers? Maybe. Or did it provide evidence for an idea that scientists had long considered a possibility but had not yet proved? So it'd be between H and J. So that's when I would refer back to the text and look at balanced study. And that's where you get the right answer, because when it's saying that, talking about an idea, evidence for an idea, it's talking about possible culprits in the text. That's pretty close. So that's why J is the best answer. And also there weren't really a lot of assumptions about anything going on. So you could maybe use that word to help you figure it out. Number 35, moving on. According to the passage, Ballin discovered that the angular momentum of the warp portion of the Milky Way and the angular momentum of the Sagittarius dwarf are, and this is directly from the text, so it's line 80 and 81, and that's identical in both quantity and direction. A lot of these are directly from the text. In fact, the next two are as well. So according to the passage for 36, the central bulge of the Milky Way is comprised of what? And this is just the first paragraph, line 6, older stars and a black hole. So G. The next one, 37, the author refers to the swirling pattern of a hurricane primarily in order to, why is the author doing that? And you had to probably look for that in the text and find this actual line, but when you find it, you will be able to see that it's to explain the shortcomings of the plum and pizza metaphor, and it's line 19. Oops, you can read that there. Oops. 38, the passage directly compares the Milky Way's disk as it is affected by its warp to, and this is worded it's kind of an unclear fashion. It is affected by its warp to. So it's, what is it being compared to is a better way to question it, but it's just the pizza dough. So that's how it's being spun and being warped. That's G, excuse me. Come here. 39. According to the passage, which of the following statements best describes the movement of the Sagittarius dwarf with respect to the Milky Way? So what is, you want to look at that, and we're also looking for best description according to the passage. So you can look through all your choices. Right away, A, it appears to be in roughly polar orbit around the Milky Way. Maybe. It appears to orbit the Milky Way at an angle of roughly 45 degrees. No, doesn't say that in the text. Nope. C, it follows the movement of the stars in the Milky Way's disk at a slightly faster rate. Maybe. It once followed the movement of the stars in the Milky Way's disk, but now seems to move erratically along its own path. No, if you remember the text, you're going to know, oops, I didn't mean to circle that. You're going to know that that's not true. So what's the best answer? You might want to go back to the text if you have time, but I found the answer. It's on lines 39 through 40, and that's where A, it's discussed directly. I didn't mean to cross off roughly. That should have just said Milky Way right there. So that's why the answer is A, right in the text. So look at how many questions are from the text. There's 35, 36, 37, and also, well, 38 is in the text as well. Not a line number, but 39 is a line number. So some of these readings, you can go right back in the text. And maybe the most difficult, boring readings is when you do that. Last question for reading. The passage describes angular momentum as the amount of a system's what? Vertical deviation within an orbital path. G, movement in a straight line, through space. H, gravitational pull. Or J, spin or rotation. So we're going to need to find angular momentum unless you remember it. And so I went back in the text and looked, and I found it on line 65, and it just says exactly what an angular momentum is. So it's spin or rotation. It does talk about a straight line, but it compares the spin or rotation to a straight line. So that's that. Thanks for playing, and thanks for sticking with this test.